Museums Victoria respectfully acknowledges the traditional owners of the lands where we work, the Wurundjeri and Boon peoples of the Eastern Kulin Nation, and First Peoples language groups and communities across Victoria and Australia. We pay our respects to their elders past, present, and their emerging leaders. Our organisation, in partnership with the First Peoples of Victoria, is working to place First Peoples living cultures and histories at the core of our practice.
Womenjika, welcome. Welcome everyone. My name is Justice Nelson, Jara Wurrung, Yora Wiradjuri woman. I am also the manager of First Peoples Experience and Engagement at Museums Victoria. It is my great pleasure to welcome you to Melbourne Museum tonight for this special event, and a warm welcome to those who are joining us online. I begin by acknowledging the Wurundjeri Woi-wurrung and Boon peoples of the Eastern Kulin Nations, the traditional owners of the land on which we work and where we gather this evening. I pay my respects to their ancestors and elders, and to all elders and First Nations people with us this evening. I also acknowledge Jacinta Ruru from Aotearoa, Ana Lara from Mexico, and extend a special welcome to traditional owner and elders here tonight, N'arweet Carolyn Briggs and Uncle Brendan Kennedy. Tonight's event is part of Future Forums, Ideas Shaping Tomorrow, a series of monthly conversations proudly presented by Museums Victoria that brings together the world's brightest innovators and creative thinkers to reflect on big ideas and important questions that shape our future. Today's program, First Nations for Water Justice, is inspired by our current Tri-Nations First Peoples exhibition, Naadohbii to Draw Water. This exceptional exhibition brings together contemporary First Peoples artwork from Turtle Island, Canada, Aotearoa, New Zealand, and Australia on the connections to water, illustrating the solidarity between First Peoples nations across the globe around environmental, political, and cultural ties and relationships to this vital resource. Tonight's discussion will explore how First Nations communities are a crucial but often overlooked voice in conversations about sustainability, climate action, and environmental policy. Our panel will discuss the importance of First Nations knowledge in protecting this essential element to all life on Earth, sharing important projects and initiatives that are being led by Indigenous communities around the world to create a more sustainable future for us all. It is with great gratitude and respect, Yora woman and Senior Curator of First Peoples South Eastern Australia Collections for Museums Victoria and Lead Curator of Naadohbii for Australia. Barak and thank you.
Thank you, colleague and my cousin, Justice. I'd like to acknowledge I'm a guest on Boon and Wurundjeri Woi-wurrung country, and acknowledge elders and community and their care and connection to the waterways of this country. I'm a Yora woman. I grew up in Shepparton, so we've had a lot of water up there at the moment. And I've grown up surrounded by the Dongala River, the Murray River, Campaspe or the Yakawa River, and Gaila River or the Goulburn River, as we all know it. So I am a river woman. Tonight we're going to be talking about water. And before we really kick it off, I wanted to just leave one thing in our minds where the World Health Organization, I should say, states that by 2025, half of the world's population will live in areas with permanent water scarcity. 2025, it's not very far away. So tonight we've got speakers, as Justice mentioned, that will be talking around the cultural connections to water, the legal and the justice around water, and the many kind of sustainability and protection practices that have been going on for a long time with our people. So we're in Naadohbii at the moment. We're in Wurrung Gallery, Bunjalaka Aboriginal Cultural Centre. And Naadohbii is a Tri-Nations exhibition that connects Aotearoa and Turtle Island, Canada, and Australia. And we've got artists from each of these countries reflecting on water from their cultural perspectives, political perspectives, and sharing their stories. And there are some beautiful conversations and cultural parallels playing out here and also within First Peoples exhibition, where the exhibition continues. And just as I'm holding this poster, so sorry everyone online, you're not going to be able to get one tonight, but you can come in and get one if you can, or we might be able to post one to you. Might regret saying that. The museum's like, no. Anyway, we'll get there. But this is a poster by the Ornament Collective, which is a collective from Turtle Island, Christy Belcourt and Isaac Murdoch. And they're a grassroots group, activist group, artist group, and they're really sharing their knowledge and their care for country across the world. So you can take one of these posters if you would like one. It's at the back of this display here, and also engage with what these posters are saying over the course of the night and maybe at the end of the talk. So I'd like to introduce the speakers tonight, and then I'm going to ask Professor N'arweet Carolyn Briggs AM to come up and share share a story of country and place with us. And I'd like to introduce her. So Professor N'arweet Carolyn Briggs AM is a Boon Wurrung senior elder and is the chairperson and founder of the Boon Wurrung Foundation. In 2020, she completed her PhD on Indigenous Knowledge Transmission, Yulenj Boon Wurrung, and she is currently one of the chief investigators in the ARC project Repairing Memory and Place, an Indigenous-led approach to urban water and design, which is a collaborative project led by Monash University's Faculty of Art, Design and Architecture. And Museums Victoria is also on this ARC project with Professor N'arweet Carolyn Briggs. So we also have online, hello Jacinta. So Jacinta Ruru is Raukawa Ngāti Ranginui woman and is a professor of law at the University of Otago, Aotearoa, New Zealand. Jacinta researches how state legal systems should reconcile with their Indigenous peoples, their laws and knowledges, and specifically considers Māori rights and responsibilities to care for, own, manage and govern lands and waters. So welcome, Jacinta. We also have Uncle Brendan Kennedy, who is a Tati Tati, Lachi Lachi, Wadi Wadi, Weki Weki, Muddy Muddy, Yitha Yitha, and Ngāri Ngāri traditional owner. Uncle Brendan is an artist who has deep knowledge and extensive work experience in these areas of First Peoples culture, language, art, science, and advocacy. He's a strong advocate for cultural flows, the abolishment of aqua nullius, and water justice has been instrumental, and he has been instrumental in elevating the profile of First Nations water rights in the Murray-Darling Basin. And finally, we welcome Ana Lara Hines, who is a Mexican mestiza with ancestry tracking back to the Naadohbii people in the centre of Mexico. She is currently undertaking a PhD at Monash University in collaboration with Professor N'arweet Carolyn Briggs AM. The research considers urban underground waterways through the Indigenous paradigm of relationality, as it can contribute to more sustainable management of urban waterways and better protection of layers of cultural meaning embedded in the underground. So quite a phenomenal list of people here tonight, so we're going to have some good yarns, I think. But I also wanted to mention tonight we'll be taking audience questions. So we're using an online Q&A platform called Slido. So please don't hesitate to join the conversation online and also in the audience. I think the details are down here. And you can visit slido.com using your mobile phone or other device and enter the event code #water0811. And so you can ask us questions as we go. So I'd like to invite N'arweet, Professor N'arweet Carolyn Briggs, up to the lectern and to share a story of your country. And welcome.
Thank you. It's great to see old friends and new friends. So it is about the connection, and it's something that we all have in common. And I suppose it's my presentation of what it's about in relation to time of chaos. That's what I've titled my story. But it's, and whether you can put it as time of chaos of what's happened over the last 2.5 years with COVID. We had a lot of time to think about things, but it was also about connection. And it is also about water, or warani. So it's also about welcome. So Wamajika, Marambik Bik Bunarong, Namda, Baruptan, Ata Willam. And as one of the descendants of the first peoples, of the Yiluk Willam people of the Boon Wurrung language group of the Greater Eastern Kulin Nation. We welcome you all here tonight and extend our hand in friendship with the friends and the staff of Bunjalaka, or the Melbourne Museum. So tonight I acknowledge the traditional lands of our ancestors, but it is also a part of a larger nation known as the Eastern Kulin, the 5 language groups to our neighbours, Woi Wurrung, Dun Wurrung, the Jaja Wurrung, and the Wurrung. And I suppose it's what we think about the river, the sacred river that flows past us, which is now called the Yarra, represented the lifeblood of the Eastern Kulin as it flowed out into our Great Bay. So these are part of the stories of recognising that it's a major living entity. So I can do that part of it as what the laws and structures of what we talk about in law and customs. It's about our inherent right to be able to care for the waterways, but we've never been able to articulate that in such a way. So when we talk about the time of chaos, as I couched it, is when we noted, or the old people in our worldview saw we broke law with nature. And it's something we need to think about. As human beings, we can have impacts in the intersection between, and I didn't have all this in order, but I've got it there. I was showing it before earlier about my time. It's called deep time, the filling of the bay, time of chaos, approximately about 10,000 years ago. The Boon Wurrung witnessed the sea rising and dramatically creating a bay they now call Naadohbii, which became known as Melbourne's Port Phillip Bay. Before this Bic, our land, which became known as the Greater Melbourne, extended right out to our sea, which is what we call Wurrung. The Wurrung flowed across our Bic to our Wani, our sea. The large plain that they had long been entrusted with to protect was covered in bawth, grass, terrain of the woodlands, and on Boon Wurrung men hunted their game, their kangaroo, and their barramal, emu. The Burgooks women cultivated the yam daisy. They collected the food from the Wurrung, the water river, the Wani, the sea, the harvest, the ilk, the eel, and migrated through every year. The Boon Wurrung are the custodians of their Bic, but trade and they welcomed people from other parts of the Kulin nation. They obeyed the laws of Bunjil, who travels as an eagle, and Waiwan, who protects our waterways, travels as a crow. One of the most important laws that Bunjil taught us required us to understand Wurrung, the law of the land, and how we obey Bunjil, not to harm our biks, not to harm our bubups, and particularly not harm our waterways or a one. So one day there came a time of crisis. The Boon, Wurrung and the other Kulin nations were in conflict. They argued, they fought, they neglected their bik, their land. They neglected their marinol, yam daisies. The animals were overkilled and not always eaten. The Gurmbuk, the fish, were caught during their spawning season. The ilk were not harvested, the eels. This chaos grew, and the Wani, the sea, became very angry and began to rise. The Wani, the river, became flooded, and eventually the whole of the flat plain became a barren, a waterway. It threatened to flood the whole of their Biranga, the river country. Bunjil was very angry with these people, and he told them that they had to change their ways if they wanted to save their land. The people thought about what they'd been doing and made a promise or a dambal to follow Bunjil's Wurrung, the law of the land. Bunjil walked out to the Wurrung, to the sea, and raised his spear to direct the waters from stop rising. Bunjil then made the Boon Wurrung promise that they must respect the Wurrung, the law of the land. And the Barney, or Pavanata, Mother Earth. The barn, the water never subsided, but it stayed to create what we know now as the bay, or we call it Naram, Port Phillip Bay. Wani, Wurrung, our sea, took away much of our lands, of the Boon Wurrung, and much of their Biranga, their country, which is Rung, which is the River of Mist, which was reduced to a narrow strip of the coastline. The Boon Wurrung learnt that from those mistakes that they had to return to those values, to respect the laws of Bunjil. Dillabrook, they take a greater care of their lands, of Bunjil, their bubups, their children. They meet on a regular occasion with the Kulin and to sort out their differences through sports, debates, dance. And one of the significant meeting sites is what is located Government House. Still an active law, British law. And the Boon Wurrung people, on their history from one generation to next, could, through these stories and drawings, including knowledge of earthquakes and the ferocity of Wani, a wind, the fire. And those are the things we had to learn about. How do we understand? We had to understand our seasons. We have to understand how the waters existed through the headlands, which now is Sorrento and Queenscliff. That's where the major Wurrung was. There's a 100-metre drop down there. So it was a major waterfall. A 100-metre drop, can you imagine, the River of Mist? See that intersection between between what you know as Queen's Bridge. That was the crossing point between the Wurrung and the Boon Wurrung. And when they removed that waterfall there, it disconnected us all. It disconnected a breakdown in our communities. It disconnected about how we relate to each other. And it's those sort of things we need to think about. It's about that intersection between cultures, traditional laws and customs. So that's basically what I would talk about when we talk about understanding how we read country. How do we understand country? How do we understand how we read our seasons? All of these things are very important to what makes our understanding of our being. And water is also a living, breathing entity. What do we have in common with each other, other than being humans? We're made up of water. And yet we can't look after the valuable asset, which is our waterways. We disrupt them, we redirect them, we put them underground, we don't learn to live around water, we don't appreciate the veracity of water, and yet we have a great fear of water. Maybe we should, because we don't respect it. We don't respect in ourselves. So it's something we need to think about when we're talking about what we understand about the most vital asset is the waterways that we live in and we're a part of. And it's our existence, because Mother Earth, Babanata, requires water to survive. She dries up and gets cracked and leaches out and she pays back. So it's something we need to think about, the importance of the value of water. And I suppose that's a little bit a part of what I can talk about, but it's my co-host here, and thank you. Went on a different trajectory there, but that's okay. It's not a colonial construct, it's about Indigenous knowledges. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much, N'arweet. It's a generous gift that you give every time you speak, and sharing that knowledge, so thank you. What you said about breaking law with nature really stuck out for me, and I wanted to throw to Jacinta online and ask you about the work that you do. So, you know, your work looks at Indigenous rights and the way that we own and manage and govern land and water. Can you talk a little bit about your work, you know, from your perspective over in Aotearoa and the world as well? I know you're international. Oh, sorry, Jacinta, you're just on mute. Sorry, we can't hear you. Tech people? It's at your end, okay. Sorry, we still can't hear you. Okay, sorry, Jacinta, we might come back to you, and our tech fellas will help you out via email. But before we go back to Jacinta, Uncle Brendan, I wanted to ask you about the question or the word, the notion of aquanalius, and how you're challenging that and what that actually means as well.
Aquanalius. Remember terra nullius? That bad old word, terra nullius. Aquanalius. I think Virginia Marshall, she coined that phrase, and we are now echoing in the words, aquanalius. We want to remove aquanalius. No more aquanalius. We don't want it. So it's really around how the colonisers, you've got to go right back. And Auntie's really good at going right back. Takes me back, would you? When they first come out here, whenever they say it was, the first place they went to was the waters and the rivers and the creeks. So that's where the first conflict was. We've got to take this, river, we've got to take this lake, we've got to take this waterway. Oh, there's tribes, there's First Nations people there. That's where the conflicts the first conflicts happened. You'll find if you travel far across country, especially the Murray-Darling Basin, you'll see places called Poison Water Hole and Murderous Creek or Invincible Bend and all that. So aqua nullius is really, it's, it's in the same breath as cultural flows. And we've got a funny way, black fellas, of confusing the white fellas. We're unpredictable and we come up with our use of the English language and the terminology. But aqua nullius is one of those. And certainly it's in similarities to cultural flows. They're assertions by our people to say, you stole our water off us, belonged to us. It's not no one's water, it's water that belongs to the First Nations, our people, our country. And we have creation stories that, I wouldn't say back us up or verify us, but certainly supports. Aqua nullius is one of those, another barrier, treaty. Treaty's another one. Threshold we have to get over. Aqua nullius is one, cultural flows is another one. It's 230 years of all these. Terra nullius was the first one. So many of them, isn't there? So we just keep working our way. When we're gone, there'll be another line of our mobs coming along to bust down. So as long as the coloniser keeps putting up all of these barriers, well, guess what? We're not going away. We've been here for 200,000 years. We're not going anywhere. Certainly water is... that's a fight we're really now starting to... We've been locked out of the water space, so... I'm talking too much. I'm going to save what I'm going to say up there, but for aqua nullius, it's that legal sense that the colonisers believe that we have no right to the water. And even to this day, we still don't own, we own 0.2% of the water. 0.2%. Whereas we were once 100% water. Whatever you want to, whatever fits your mindset, whether it's ownership, managers, custodians, shepherds, stewards, whatever. Still, we were responsible. And we have never ceded that responsibility. And we'll talk about some of the reasons why. A lot of it we cannot tell you about because it's so sacred. But if you think of even Mungo, ancient lake. So, where was I again? Aqua nullius? Yeah, so aqua nullius, we're going to go around and around with this now for a long time until we crack it. We crack the system. And I'll tell you now, you've never seen a more complicated beast than the water management system in this country. And they seem to think they know what's going on, but they haven't.
Thank you. Lots more to say, eh?
Lots more to say.
And you've got something you want to present.
7 p.m.
Oh, there we go.
I'm going to talk. I'm going to wing it. I'm going to free flow.
Yeah.
Freestyle.
Okay. Well, maybe towards the end you can close us off with that. But yeah, it's a really interesting kind of concept of challenging, aqua nullius and what that means today. And I think, what we're talking about here a lot is relationality, is that interconnectedness that First Peoples have to waterways, to land, to the subterranean, to the skies. It's all one. And I'm really interested in that and this idea of water as a sentient being, or water existing as, like you said, living and breathing. And Jacinta, are we back with you? No.
I think it gets caught up as a commodity. It's about
Sorry, Jacinta.
Yeah, oh, you're right. Are you on board?
We can't hear you. Sorry about that.
We heard you before. Rehearsing,
Yeah, sorry. And no, sorry, we can't hear you at the moment. But Art, yeah, the living and breathing entity that you're talking about, I wanted to ask you and Anna about your work and the research that you're doing on, looking at the history of colonial interventions and how they've redirected and changed our waterways. Do you want to talk a little bit about that?
Yeah. Hello, thank you for having me, and thank you as well for greeting me in this land. I come from a very faraway land from Mexico, so thank you for having me. But I guess it's very interesting coming back to Aquanolius because my research that I've been collaborating and co-creating with N'arweet is about looking at how design and planning translates these colonial modern practices of water management into the city, more particularly into waterways that sort of cross the boundaries between the visible and invisible domains of the urban space. So we're thinking about displaced, drained, and piped waterways, which normally don't get that much attention as rivers that you can visually see. So you wouldn't know about many of the rivers that are here in the city are actually drained, and the life of everything still flows through these rivers. So you will see eels in many of these, stormwater pipes that come through the bay from the Coral Sea, which is amazing. Amazing eels are incredible. So they come all the way here and then fight their way into the pipe system, and sometimes you see them in the park in Melbourne University, or for example, another case study that we had as well with N'arweet was Riponlea Estate, which is a super interesting story. And you can see the eels in Riponlea Lake, which is also very interesting because those pipes are tiny, they're not stormwater pipes. And those human interventions of water management have to do with this idea of modernity in the city, which basically is translating Aquanolius into planning and design for the cities. So it's interesting because I'm an anthropologist, so looking at design from this perspective of relationality and understanding how everything's connected, as well as a mestiza and a foreigner, how can I relate to your country and how can I pay respects to your country and your waterways? And it's about becoming with water and figure out what are your cultural practices that relate to water for yourselves. So I guess that's what we're working on.
Yeah.
It's big. And it's about water memory. Because like I keep going back, water has memory, we have memory, and it's also about not looking at 4-year plans. So we threw it out to a 100-year plan because government works on these 4-year plans. So we thought, let's extend it. It took 200 years to disrupt it and do that, channel it underground. Maybe it's going to take another 100 years to rethink about what is impacting on us as humans, because we need that water and water needs us. And it gives us life and oxygen that we forget about. And there's all that turbidity what's going on at the moment where they've ripped out a lot of the mangroves along our coastline, and now the surface are carrying on because this mud slush is coming up, impacting on their waves. So it is affecting all sorts of our activities, what's in the coast, what's happening in our waterways, it's what's happening to our breath. It's taking our breath, it's taking the power about what we are made of. We've forgotten, we belong to water.
I think that's a beautiful, gifting again of knowledge around water has memory. That's really important to consider. And Jacinta, I'm hoping we can hear you this time. Can you hear me?
I don't think so.
There we go.
Can you hear me?
We can hear you.
You can hear me?
Thank you. Thanks for holding on in there. Joys of technology still. But I wanted to ask you again, about your, really important work that you do, but also this idea of water as memory and water as sentient and in particular around the Wanganui River and the personhood that that river has officially, you know, in a Western concept now, I suppose.
So, well, tēnā koutou katoa, ngā mihi nui kia koutou. So, in my language, in Te Reo Māori, the Māori language, saying hello and greetings to you all. I wish I was there in person. It would be so much better. But thank you for enabling this. I've really enjoyed listening to this evening and really connecting and thinking a lot about the similarities to here in Aotearoa, New Zealand, from a Māori perspective, and how we talk about the water being us physically from a Māori perspective. The water is our ancestors. We are the water is us. Particularly if you can see my arm here, we think about like the veins going through our bodies. That's the veins of Papatūnuku, our Earth Mother. You know, we're intimately linked in, and through that have enormous responsibilities going both ways. The water has responsibilities and we have responsibilities to care and to nourish one another. And when we are unwell, or when the water is unwell, we are unwell. So our health and well-being is intimately connected into the health and well-being of waterways. And so from a Māori perspective, and thinking about it from a legal perspective too, Māori have never ceded their water. Māori continue to strongly argue that the water is us. Under our Māori legal system, we have the primary responsibilities to care for the waterways of New Zealand. And our state legal system has made up a whole lot of, like the Equinalius, a whole lot of kind of fiction and convenient legal truths to be able to claim in some way rights to lakes and rivers. But in New Zealand, there's never been clear and plain legislation that has been passed to say that Māori do not own the rivers and lakes. And so we continuously are reminding the government of that, and that they are passing state law on the assumption that they have control. So that's just a little bit of background to help understand the Whanganui River, which has become world famous, really, for the solution that was entered into, legislated for in 2017. So Whanganui River is the third longest river in New Zealand. It's not a remote river by any means. It comes from the mountains, borders a national park, and then flows right out to the sea. It's got a hydro dam on it. Farmers rely on it for irrigation. It flows through a city, so it's got a major population living alongside it. So it's a big waterway for New Zealand, and for the Māori First Nations entity who have lived alongside that river and have cared for that river for hundreds and hundreds of years. They're in negotiations with our government under our Treaty of Waitangi Claims Settlements. And our government has a bottom line, it's tied up with this Equinalius, myths and fictions. So the government has its very strong position that either the Crown has responsibility for the water, and that the Crown, our government, would not give ownership of water to Māori. And Māori are saying, but the water is ours. And so you've got two positions at loggerheads. And so that's where that legal personality idea came in as a really valuable middle ground. And it enabled in New Zealand a legal personality negotiation to come through. It made sense under state law, and it made sense under Māori legal system. So the legal personality idea is that the river owns itself. It is its own ancestor, and our legislation now recognises that Whanganui River is an ancestor the face of that ancestor has been given in legislation. Two people can now speak on behalf of that river, but it's now known in New Zealand as being a living entity. Māori have always known this, but now all of New Zealanders and anyone trying to interact with that river now needs to understand it as a living entity with its own rights and responsibilities and obligations, as if it was a natural person. And that's been potentially really revolutionary for us in New Zealand, because it enables that meeting in of the Māori legal system. New Zealanders are now getting a glimpse into our Māori worldview and our rights and responsibilities and obligations to care for that waterway and waterways throughout New Zealand.
Thank you. And what can you share some of the impacts of this decision around the personhood of the river, and what's been happening on a community level, and how that's changed the way communities are working with, or the government is working with also the communities?
So look, it will be intergenerational to change before the real impact and change of this will be really felt. I think it's you don't disrupt decision-making, decision-making processes, a whole societal way overnight. And so it will take, generations to really encapsulate and enable the, that shifting of significant control to Māori, and Māori being able to have a voice for the decision-making for that river. So I'll just say that as an opening comment, that it's going to take time, and we can't become impatient, I don't think, around that. From the Māori kind of perspective, Māori need to be given the time to be able to take on the care of this waterway once again. So I'm not of that tribal entity. So my tribal First Nations comes just slightly further up in the North Island. So it would be much better to talk to a Whanganui First Nations person about what's happening on the ground and what's really happening along that riverway. But look, it certainly has, it's starting to change the narrative. So it's not that all development has been stopped in regards to that river. So there's still decision-making processes that would need to go through, can still go through a court system to get a consent to be able to take water for farming purposes, or to put something into the river. So all of that New Zealand law still operates, but whenever any decision maker now comes to making a decision about that river, they have to start from the point that this is a person, this is an ancestor. And so it changes that decision making, and we will start to see that over time as more and more decisions start to come through. But we've had very few decisions and planning and so on come through yet. Those who still had existing rights to the river have continued their existing rights.
Thank you. We have a question from the audience, which I might throw to the panel here. And this comes in from an anonymous, but they say, I work in water engineering where we apply practices that come from the Western world. How can we start incorporating Indigenous knowledge into big projects? So, who wants, Uncle Brendan? Looks like you've got...
We've been saying this for a long time now. And what we're hearing more and more is the best available science. And that just drives me crazy. I bite their heads off when they say that, best available science. We've got every nation, every clan, every language group, every family has traditional ecological knowledge, traditional and cultural science. All of that, what they say that they've developed, engineering, we have all that. We have cultural engineers, ancestral hydrologists already on country. So it's just basic, we'll just ignore. When you think about, say, Australia as a business, you'd say that's a very poor business when you're not even utilising the very resource and expertise that's been developed for over 2,000 generations. Very poor business, very poor. Whatever they come up with, strategies and corporate styles or whatever they design, it's poor because it's not based. I always say when you're in Rome, do as the Romans. You wouldn't go to Japan. We couldn't go to Japan and try and apply our cultural knowledges in Japan. But they seem to think they can come here and try and apply the Western or the world ways of managing the ecosystems and natural resource management and the environment. You can't do it. Did that answer your question?
I think so.
Somewhat?
Definitely. Yeah, no, it definitely did.
Anyway, the short answer is go to the First Nations people.
Yeah,
Here is a library, here is a university of knowledge sitting right there. One person. And then you look at all of her kids and grandchildren. They're all the professors, they're all the masters, all the doctors.
Futures, yeah. I think, you know, what that person is working as water engineers, we're working with local governments to try and disrupt. We love that word, disrupt. It's about changing the paradigm. I think it's a lot to do with that. And celebrate that we're still here to be able to work try and work that it's no ownership of water. It's something that we all require to exist. And we're willing to share, which we now have a sort of but in departments, it's always who owns what and controls under their legal, toe the party lines, or what these departments expect in when working with communities. They don't open up themselves to work across and the diversity of the different communities.
There's a minister for water. Minister for water.
There's a minister
for water. Can you believe it?
And we're not in that team. We're not even advisors
I say to them,
that
all right, I want to see the minister for fish. I want to see the minister for emu. I want to see the minister for kangaroo. I want you all to rock up here. Because if you're going to be the minister for something, you better get specific and do whatever it is you're saying. Yeah. Minister for water. Every state has a minister for water. Isn't that unbelievable?
I think that's something we need to think about too.
But I think it's a really interesting point. The idea of separating water from country, separating water from the people. And a minister for emu or a minister for kangaroo. We go back to that whole thing of relationality of the interconnectedness.
Minister for the dingo.
Of it all. Yeah.
One I'm looking for.
And long-necked turtle. That's my
end
turtle.
up with it actually.
But it's actually really important to think about. And we have another question as well, which is kind of on the same kind of in the same vein, but it's Jules asks, how can we use greater awareness of the connection to country and especially our waterways to help people address the impacts of climate change? So Jacinta, how, from your perspective and from your experience, and I suppose even, maybe we could go back to the case of the river and the personhood of the river, how do you see that affecting the awareness around climate change and, caring for country?
Yeah, so there's lots of ways to think about and answer this. I'm also agreeing with the panellists around, so when we're thinking about climate change and we're thinking about the solutions for our future, we have to draw on our Māori, our Indigenous sciences from here in New Zealand. Our Indigenous sciences have answers and solutions for us all, including and how we are as a country going to deal with climate change. And so I think that's a really important component in there. I do. So, just thinking about that legal personality idea and rights of nature, and sometimes one can think that by giving rights to nature, that this is going to be a really good tool to address climate change, that we're going to be able to better connect humanity into the environment. We're going to think about the rights of the environment is going to be forefront, that we're going to place the position of the trees, the waters, the mountains at the forefront of any decision making, which is all good, but I do caution that we don't just take it from a rights of nature perspective, that it only makes sense if we're doing it by placing the Indigenous worldview at the forefront of that. Otherwise, we're just going to be replicating colonisation again and again and again. So in terms of climate change and thinking about our waterways and so on, a really important tool for all of us, and well, I'm thinking here in New Zealand, but for countries, is to think about how we deliberately position Māori knowledge, Indigenous knowledge, is right at the forefront of thinking about our solutions, and enable transform and disrupt to actually truly enable Māori leadership or Indigenous leadership for solution making. Like, give them the budgets, give them the responsibilities, and by drawing on Indigenous knowledges, I think is one of our greatest hopes for trying to live with climate change in a more sustainable way going into the future. And if we don't take that opportunity to empower Indigenous leadership, I think is going to be disastrous.
Here, thank you. Anna, with your work in urban design and from leading that from an Indigenous perspective, how do you see your work in kind of addressing this conversation around climate change?
Well, one thing that is very interesting that you mentioned as well, and is the idea of water memory. And I think that's a very good way a practical way to understand climate change, especially if we think about the floods that we've been having in the last few weeks. Because I focus on very practical activities or practices that relate us to water, and I think that's something that we all can do anywhere in the world. And that is and it's interesting because maybe it's a way to giving legal rights or legal personality to rivers is brings us to an empathic way to see a waterway. So through these practices that I've been working on, walking waterways, for example, and then walking them in dry days, walking them on wet days, walking them on the creek, outside of the creek, and then just notice those sort of wavering, how the water works, and understanding how the water feels, the quality of the water, how it flows, what kind of other entities surround the water. You can definitely see climate change there. And I think this awareness of these practical activities that we can do on a daily basis, I think that really brings us to a moment of, we need to do something about climate change. So I think it also starts on a sort of local level, on oneself, tracing this relationship with water that we can all do as well. I think the responsibility is for all of us.
Yeah, it's really interesting to think about what's underneath where we're walking. N'arweet, you mentioned earlier the way we cover water. And I know, even in the city, there's waterways, ancient waterways that we walk over all the time. Did you want to talk a little bit about that in your work in kind of the ARC project that you're on, but also this kind of urban design and architecture that I know you're very involved in with your professorship?
Wow. It is also about disruption. And it's also about what they've covered up because of fear. And I think it's fear and it's about Western control of our waterways. We've learnt to live around water because water was a part of us. So, and then they started covering up. It's like out of sight, out of mind. It's very similar to the way European has done that with us as people. So if they're doing that with an entity like the living movement of water, something we've got to think about, this disruption. And I said, let's unpack it. Let's recreate the creek lines that flow through this city. Let's look at other ways of working around water and stop the fear of water. Because even lots of things we discuss about how they put barriers up against water to block it out of mind, out of sight, extract what they want from it, give us back the residual, what's been toxic. So we've got to think about how we construct ourselves and think about Western impacts of rechanging water. I've got a project that's that water memory, and it's that massive. They're planning on 4 million to ascend of new settlers on a major water area down in that area that disrupted the coastline, and they're already thinking about how they're going to restructure the water without consultation with First Peoples, which is a vital asset for a lot of things, and people have extracted that nitrogen and all of those things out of that asset that was once a part of who we were and how we travelled. Because you've got to think about Melbourne. It was one of the greatest and the biggest wetland in Australia. Because we think of Northern Territory. Ours was much, much, much larger as an area of body of water. How did we navigate around it? How did we understand the ebbs and flows of our water systems? Because we understood ourselves. We understood our body. We understood Pabanata, Mother Earth, and how she releases, and understand when water rises for fresh water. And one of the things we did is finding on the coastline where natural fresh water has occurred with the rock wells and the filtering system, that people could live with water, fresh water around our coastline. And I think about that adaptation of that story I've told you before about the time of chaos. It's quite apt about what we titled it. But I was down at Portland, and I got a story down there from a geologist that told a story that from Madagascar, from 10,000 years ago, there was a massive tsunami that created the bay that we've got now. So it pushed up the tectonic plates, disrupted the volcano eruption that caused the change to fill our bay. So the scientist says that. Old people say in their worldview this, but can you imagine a massive tsunami coming in across this massive continent to ours to impact on us? We're still here. But, it's something we had to adapt with, change. From a river country to a bay country. And then it took science to say, those blackfellas, they were right about that story, about the grasslands, the river that ran through. The river still runs through that bay. You've got to learn to see it.
And that's a good point, Art. Brendan, you want to add to that?
They were right, or they are right?
They are right.
We are.
We were already knowing the way our body flows, because we think about country as our body. You sever here, what happens? Something we need to think about. It's a body, as human, as part of us. So how do we treat ourselves? How do we understand the connection to place and people if we can't understand ourselves? It's a journey. Disrupt.
Disrupt. It's one word to take from tonight especially. But, there's these themes of connecting not only our bodies to country and considering the way in which we respect ourselves and we respect water. And, Jacinta mentioned this living with and adapting to climate change, because we're in it now. It's not something that's happening or going to happen. We're living in it. And putting Indigenous knowledges at the forefront of that. Now, I wanted to, someone did have a question around, do you think the Murray River will ever be granted personhood? And I think that's a whole other conversation.
Yes, it will.
With a group, a nation.
Yeah, and I think
Lots
that
of
also
nations.
involves the conversation around treaty as well, and a lot of different things.
That's a yes.
Yes. Yes.
Yes.
Yes. So we could maybe go into that, but I think just to kind of wrap it up, and we may go over about 5 minutes or so if everyone's okay with that. But I wanted to ask, and I know Uncle Brendan also you want to say something, and we might leave that to the end as well, to finish off on the strong words. But I wanted to ask, what does water justice mean? What does water justice mean for you right now and for us all, really? That's a big question, but we're talking about justice, water justice, environmental justice, but what does it mean for you?
Well, that water got to have justice. Water, I said it in a video. Water has to have water for itself. And I know we're in the floods time at the moment. The rivers are flooding everywhere. That's the rivers themselves saying and doing to themselves what they need to do. That's not man, humans, anyone else. That's the rivers and the waters itself doing that. And that tells you, that proves that the water and the rivers, they are living entities. It's funny, now we're talking about waterways. I think there's a confusion between the Westerners' version of waterway and First Nations' version of waterway. They see waterway or water as an asset or something to exploit or extract and make something from. From our perspective, the water is everything. There's a poster up there, water is life. And like what Arnie said, the rivers are the veins, and the creeks are the arteries, and all of those lakes are the organs, all of those big wetlands. For every part of country there is an ancestral being in the landscape, and all those waterways are all the parts of that ancestral being for that language group, and then the next language group, and so on and so on. So you've got this big patchwork, quilt thing of all the waterways and all the systems for that particular areas. And it changes right across country. So, what was your question again?
What is justice for you?
What is justice?
That's a lot of things, but...
Will there ever be justice in this country? Water justice, well, for us, to see how, like Aunt Carolyn, did you ever see clear water when you was a child?
Yes, because I
Yes,
lived
you
on
did.
the Edwards River, and we had to get the water for drinking. And then I lived up near the Barker, which is Barkindji, and we had to get water trucked in because there was no... And it's been and you think about how power and Tumala, where they cut it off for 2 weeks in a community, that was in the 1980s. They disconnected the power of water to control people.
But you've seen clear water.
I've seen clear
I've
water.
never seen clear water in my country.
I had to drink it.
And for me, what makes
I'm
me sad
73.
is my kids and grandkids and descendants will never see their milu
They'll never see it.
clear. That's the big... We talk about justice. That is the biggest crime. That water... I mean, water is meant to be clear. Come from the sky and the mountains and flow all the way to the seas. What they're doing to it, they're killing it. And Badger, he said, you talk about the living Murray, well, what about the dying Barker? And that was a very powerful statement. But they're killing the rivers, or they're killing the water. And it's funny now, like you...
I think it's water banking. They do water banking.
You would have drank that water. I do
No,
remember...
I didn't.
You never drank water out of the river when you
I
was a
drank
kid.
it in the water at the Edward River in New South Wales.
We drank
Melbourne.
water out of the river when we were kids. That's a long time ago. We can't drink it straight out. Isn't that a crime against
Humanity.
Mother Earth and humanity, that you can't actually go down to that natural watercourse and drink from it?
And we witnessed it at the Barker when there was dead fish everywhere. And the information to Melbourne came 3 weeks later, but we were up there at Wilcannia and we witnessed all the dead fish because the water banking occurred up further for the cotton and rice growing. And that's real. And we saw dead fish everywhere because there was no water in the river. And what they're doing is bore water up there in Wilcannia, which is vile.
I just want to add to this, Art, now. So a farmer friend of mine at the Walk-All, he said it was a river of dead fish. It was 2 metres deep of dead fish. It was a river of dead fish going past his house. Now, it went from drinking and swimming and bathing in clear water, having babies, to now not being able to drink it. Now we can't swim in it. Now it's gotten worse. We can't touch it. We can't go near it. This is where it's progressing even more. Is that scary for you? But I just want to say, one thing I observed here is I come from a maternal kinship system. And just an observance here, there seems to be more grandmothers, sisters, nieces, daughters here than fathers, sons, grandfathers, cousins. That's a story in itself. Maybe that's the problem. Paternal, Western system is paternal, First Nation system is maternal, water.
Yep, women as water carriers.
It's something we all need to be aware of, you know. How do we manage these things? Collectively, we can do it. Individually, we can't. So it needs all of us to move and stand up. It's about taking action, I think, and that's while ever we just listen to good stories or impacts of what's happening. And we're supposed to be a first world country. We're first world. And yet the conditions of our waterways are third world. We can see it when we go to India and places like that. But what about here that's supposedly first world? And we have all this technology. We're corrupting it. So it's a commercial commodity for a select few. So we need to think about we can't bring the change ourselves. We need lawyers, we need people. It's about that, what you talked about, terra nullius, water, what did you call it? Aqua because that says that was never written in a law. That's what it means. Terra nullius was empty of the legal framework. So the water is absent of legal framework in a Western modelling system. So we have to take action collectively because the rights of water, the rights of human rights, it's a basic human right. We pay enough money for our water, don't we, in our rates?
It is, yeah.
And we demand quality water. We get fluoride. But you know what I mean? If we think about that, we should be fighting for the rights of water, justice. How does that tick over?
Well, I think what is justice is really an important thing to take from tonight. And I am just conscious of time, and I wanted to sort of bring Jacinta back in just for some final words before we pass over to Anna, and then Uncle Brendan can kind of sign us off for the evening. But Jacinta, you know, from your perspective and your work, what is justice meaning for you right now in relation to water?
Just entirely reiterate everything that's already been said, and that it's healthy water, it's healthy water, healthy people, and those waterways, need to be flourishing places that full of life and love, and through that is justice. And as Māori First Nations groups, being able to be on the water, be in the water, be part of the water, to see that coming back again, that would be incredible justice as well for us as a country. So thank you. And a whole legal system. If our legal system can actually recognise Māori responsibilities to all waterways in New Zealand, and get rid of the whole terra nullius, aqua nullius notions and ideas, that also would be justice. So kia ora. Thank you very much for this evening.
Thank you so much, Jacinta. And yes, recognition is coming out strongly as well, the importance of First Peoples recognising our sovereignty over this space. So Anna, just finally, from your perspective, in your research, what are your comments on water justice?
I guess it's like a sort of a vicious circle. I feel like justice is also sort of, and we were talking about this earlier, about this vernacular that is also Western. And I feel like water, apart from rights and responsibilities, it also needs to have accountabilities. And that is sometimes something that is left like at the very end of the discussion. So I think maybe centering on accountabilities might be an interesting way forward to think about justice.
Thank you. I don't want to have the last word. I want Uncle Brendan to have the last word. So I just want to say thank you all.
A couple of minutes.
Thank you all for coming. Thanks for everyone online joining in and sending in your questions. It's actually an honour to be here with all of you in the research and the activism and the protection of country and water that you do. And I know you've been working your whole life really on country and protecting country, and you're such an important person for me, but for this space.
Feels like I'm 100. I'm only 30.
Yeah, I thought you were only 21. But yeah, what would you like to share just to close off this event?
Well, my cousin's over there, and she's the first ever Wari, well, since the Europeans come, Wari water officer over there, my cousin, Joan Kirby. And I was a tati. So we want to see all of our nations all have their own water officers. That's official, that word, but we do what we say what we got to say in order for us to be able to be to determine our own campaign. But I'm tati, lachi, weki, wadi, mati, yiti, no. That all means no. We said no. So what they down here? Your no's too. You're the only no. The rest are different fellas. No lips. We're the no mobs.
No, because I'm also Wemba, as you know,
Yeah.
and I'm also Tirawai. So there's a lot of bloodlines flowing through this body. So, and I think with other than water, water's very important for me to keep my brain active. These are the things we need to think about. And what you're saying is, we said no. And whether no was a word that the system understood.
Yes. That was the word they said to make them understand. And so, one time I sang this song in language, and a big flood came. Mandara mengi diru durva midagi garini wara. Bilgiri wawalara bigili nyanga nyunge nyegara. Liriki nyewa kame kawelengi bapi, which is thunder and rain Floods are coming now, big flood, big water coming. Come up here and camp up on the hill now, away from the floods. And that's the message now. I should go and say that to every community that's living on the floodplains. Come and live up on the hills and that. But my people, so I'm Miluwadungi, riverman. When I say that, riverman, I'm a riverman. Every fibre of me is a riverman. I'm from the river. That's me, that's where I come from. Going back 2,000, 3,000 generations, unbroken. And I was just sitting here tonight, sometimes things dawn on you. I have to get home before all that river flows out of me, sweats out of me, and when I start to feel and realise, because most of my body's still full of my Murray River from travelling yesterday, still in my body. As it starts to recede out of my body from being off country, I've got to hurry up and get back home and get the water back in me. It's funny how now with the cultural burns, the fire, it's a catastrophe. It's a duty of care, it's danger. Now come to the First Nations. But around water, oh no, not yet. It's worth too much. But you know, my people's river, the Milu, Mili, the U is the suffix, meaning I'm telling you about that third person. U, Milu. That's in our language. That's the oldest word we got, Milu. That's the proof that the river is the third person we're talking about, a living entity. And that's documented, and that's how we describe the river. It's a magnet for me, so I know the river's that way, and I get drawn back to the river. I still live within, I'm still on the floodplain, I still live on the floodplain on the river. But if we go right back in Talekata used to call it dream time in Matamati, what is Talekata. And there wasn't a river. It was just a big pool of water, and there was a bunyal, not bunjil, bunyal, in different language, was a big giant cod bunyal. And the Wurrungis, the men, tried to catch the bunyal. And of course, bunyal had nowhere to go. There was just this big pool of water, huge. And this must have been Lake Mungo anyway. Must have been Mungo. Took off. They threw the spear into the bunyal's back. And that's how the fish got the spikes, you know, fins. And cut into the land. And the water followed, see, to make the middle of the river. This went on for a long time, until that bunyal went all the way to the Wurrung, down at the mouth. And the Wurrung is the bowels. To the Naadohbii people, they said, this is the bowels now. That's the mum, the end. See? And all through country, all the way up to the top, is this big living entity with all the body parts, legs, arms. So anyway, back to Bunyal and the Wurrungis. The Wurrungis kept following Bunyal every day, catching up, and Bunyal kept going, big fish, and splashing the tail, and that's how all the lakes were made, and all the creeks and everything. So how old is that story? We don't know. Could be 600,000 years old. Creation of that river. That's how old the river is, they say, in scientific terms, 600,000 years old. So we have that story. And further up, Kim's people, Dangala, they call it, and go up. They all got their names and their story. All of our people have all got that English word, science. See, we have all that. See? And we've been saying it, but it was like poor old sister girl there. She was talking, but no one could hear her. It was just deafness, you know, and that's what we're met with, this deaf science. Because it's like, well, you know, these native people just can't believe that the native people are capable of having such a sophisticated understanding of such a country like this. And that's where the problem is. And once we that change. And the new generation will change that. But it's some of the old colonial, old boys club. The good old boys still want to keep hold of it for, what's her name over there who took the money off the netball girls and those types of people. But, as I said, in Bilgiri, Wawalata Bilgiri, the floods, the river, it'll come around every now and again and it'll wash people out and it'll clean itself out. And if you're in the way, well, that's your bad luck. That's your problem. When it floods, it's our Christmas. It's our wonderland. The other thing is we talk about justice. What about the fish? What about the turtles? What about the yabbies and the crays? What about the plants? What about the trees and the birds? They got rights too. And they're being ignored because they're not worth any money, are they? Thank you.
I think it's time to listen. It's time for people to listen. And it's time for people to listen to us and our deep knowledge. And I think to start with a deep time story of Boon Wurrung, Wurrungi, the bay, and end with your story, Uncle. It's a beautiful example of how long our knowledge exists. It continues to exist. And for people to listen. So thank you all for coming. And thank you, Jacinta, as well, if you're still there. Really appreciate you and your work. And thank you all for talking tonight. It's been such a pleasure. Thank you.